Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I think it's been about 8 years since my first ANZOS conference, where I was so kind of starstruck that I lost all ability to speak. So I've come a long way since then. The other thing that has happened is I agree a lot with Ian Caterson. So maybe it's something to do with me getting old, I'm not sure, but that's really set up my talk. So thank you very much, Ian. So I'm going to talk about prevention, and I thought it was interesting. Ian talked about the trends over time, particularly in children. And I think it's really important that we create a supportive environment for health. And I'm going to talk about what we're doing well and what we need to do more of. So we've heard about the prevalence and the cost of chronic disease and overweight and obesity already in the last couple of days. And it's really important that we focus on the whole range of levers that we need to pull. So we need to focus on prevention as well as treatment and acute care. But what tends to be focused on when you go and have the budget briefing, for example, with the Victorian government, there was a lot of focus on ambulances, care providers for those emergency services, building new emergency wards in hospitals, and a lot of funds going into that and very little going into prevention. And I think as well as putting the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, which they literally were doing, you need to put that fence at the top. And it's critical as part of that to develop and advocate the case for prevention, and that's what I'll be doing today, but also to create a sense of urgency. This is an issue that's difficult politically because you're up against the ultra-processed food industry and a lot of other vested interests, and it's very easy to duck shove this to the next parliamentary group. You know, we won't deal with it. We've got a 3-year term. We want a lot of positive press, and it's too hard. The other thing we need to do is develop the research and evidence base, and you know, Ian was talking about that in treatment, but we need to make sure that if we're running interventions such as removing sugary drinks from site in hospitals, increasing the price of unhealthy foods, we need to understand the impacts those are having, and we need to build consensus around policy response, and I'll talk a little bit about the work that we're doing around that. So Ian's very kindly talked about what the problem is, and this rise in obesity that we're seeing, it's really, that's where the curve is increasing. That's the problem, and we're seeing a rapid increase in obesity in women in Australia as well. It is a serious problem in men, but we're seeing an increase in women, which is really worrying. And of course, Ian showed these uptakes at around between 2 and 3, and then in adolescence, and that's why we really need to protect and support our children to have healthy and active lifestyles. And the burden of disease, well, this is from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, the Global Burden of Disease study. I'm sure you would have all been aware of it, these amazing papers coming out on a regular basis. And for Australia, a high body mass index is the leading burden of disease, followed by dietary risk. Tobacco smoking is number 3. My background was in tobacco control. It took 30 years before we started to see the results of actions around policy change on behaviour, but we've really dealt with that incredibly well, and we need to use those successes where we looked at behaviour change, but we also looked at changing the policy and regulatory environment, which really embedded change and supported people to have quit smoking and stay stopped, as well as stopping children from taking up smoking. And it's just extraordinary to think we have no obesity prevention policy or strategy or nutrition strategy, given that we know this is the canary in the coal mine. It's our hospitals and many of you who will be dealing with the outcomes because it's going to get worse. So what should be done? And we know that our environment is very much shaping what we eat, and it's great outside, for example, to see there's lots of apples. It would be great if there was more water, but one of the first ANZOS meetings I came to, we had Coca-Cola. We got rid of that pretty quickly, but you know, we are all shaped by our environment, and it makes it difficult for an individual to change when that gradient is steep. So in order to support people, we need to change the gradient and make it easier for people to change individually. And I'm going to talk about how do we do that. So the Lancet did a fantastic series about on obesity, and they talked about everybody has a role. I mean, industry are always saying they have a role. They propose very weak solutions, and they want to be at the table because they want to slow down and undermine effective action, and they're pretty good at doing that, blowing a lot of smoke, pretending to collaborate, and really they're just trying to disrupt the process. But I want to talk about this top corner here, the governments and the government's role. So we know that governments can restrict unhealthy food marketing to children, which is a key influencer of children's diets. They can legislate for consumer-friendly labelling. We have an interpretive system here, which is good, and I'll talk about that. They can tax unhealthy foods, set food standards in schools, and we're seeing that ripple effect into other settings in Australia, provide healthy eating education, subsidise healthy foods, provide incentives for healthy food retailers to go into low-income areas, and I think we need to do more work in remote communities to ensure that Aboriginal populations in particular have access to healthy food. You will be able to, in those remote stores, you can often find Coca-Cola, but you can't find fruit and vegetables, or they're very expensive. And regulate to prevent positioning unhealthy food outlets where children gather, and there are little hotspots in a number of states around Australia where communities don't want to have a McDonald's or a Hungry Jack's in their street down the road from their children's school, for example. Oh, sorry, pressing the wrong one. So what progress is being made? And this was some work that was done by Gary Sachs at Deakin University, looking at policies for tackling obesity and benchmarking Australia's progress against world's best practice. And it was I think holding governments to account is a really important part of the work that we need to do, particularly as advocates, because it's very easy to fall behind, and it's very good to have an understanding of what is happening in other parts of the world. These sort of precedents are also very important to provide confidence that these kinds of policies are attractive and can be implemented and will make change. So there were a number of criteria around food policy that this study looked at, and there were 5 things that were outlined that Australia was doing well in. And that was that we have regular monitoring of body weight at a national level. We don't have a GST on fresh fruit and vegetables. I did spend one summer doing a lot of media about that because I said to the Cancer Council, why weren't you coming out in the media? And they said we didn't have a position on it, whether a GST should be go on fruit and vegetables or have no GST. And I said, well, you need a position on these things. This influences what people eat. And we've heard about diet and weight and cancer risk. So you need to take a position on this. We've had the development of the Health Star Rating Scheme. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We have regulations on health and nutrition claims. We just have a case that's in the federal court that we've taken to the ACCC about a high sugar toddler product called Shreds, designed for toddlers, 99% fruit and veg, but it's 68% sugar. And we'll be hearing about that, the result of that case in the next few months. We've got dietary guidelines, and they're evidence-based. They're not promulgated. People don't know what they are. They don't understand them. And we're seeing I Quit Sugar and Paleo Pete dominating the airways when we really the public needs to understand what makes up a healthy diet and what isn't healthy. And we do have transparency. We don't have corruption within the food regulatory system, which is good. But what more needs to be done? We don't have obesity prevention as a national priority. We don't have an obesity prevention strategy. We need a national task force. We need money for evaluation and monitoring in a similar way to what New South Wales have done. We need a national nutrition policy, look at the problems with diet. Salt's only one element. A lot of those issues around the increase in the burden of disease from diet is the result of consumption of sugary drinks. A health levy on sugar-sweetened beverages and put that money back into prevention in Australia, it would raise between $400 and $500 million every year, and 26 jurisdictions globally have now introduced that. We need time-based restrictions on broadcast media, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We need to fast-track the changes to the Health Star rating system and make it mandatory. It's only on around 17% of products. We need funding for diet and nutrition surveys. We have very piecemeal understanding of what people are eating, and if we don't do these regularly, how can we tell the impact of what we're doing? How do we know we're getting value for money, and how can we change what we're doing if it's not working? But at the moment, it's difficult to know. And we need targets for dietary intake and for reductions around key nutrients. And we have the Healthy Food Partnership, but it's not working hard enough or fast enough to make change, and it's very much dominated by the food industry. So current challenges. Marketing to children is unfettered. You don't see it because you're not the target. And I just want to play a little video that we've developed around this.
Wednesday book report due. Win a movie ticket? Cool! Oh no, bus is late again. Slurpees for only $1. I could get 10. Yes, best player. Wait till I show Jake my Macca's voucher. I wish I had a phone. I could get that Hungry Jacks up too. Jake won a thick Jake. Milo sponsors my cricket team, so I think it's pretty good to buy their stuff. Half price. Come on, they're half price. I wish I could be a Ninja Warrior. I love KFC. Minions! Can't wait to go to Macca's again.
We forget what's going on behind the scenes, and the digital targeting of children and the harvesting of their information and the shaping of their preferences is really insidious. And the problem in Australia is we have very little regulation. We have self-regulation. It doesn't reduce exposure. We've got evidence that has been done by New South Wales Cancer Council showing that it hasn't reduced exposure of children to junk food marketing on TV. And we need to reduce kids' exposure to this sort of this kind of marketing. High rating children's program like The Block, The Voice are absolutely drenched in marketing of junk food. In The Block, they've got a cafe. The contestants are eating the food. They mix up. It's not just it's product placement, which children they accept that they're a supporter of this program. It doesn't address new marketing platforms, Snapchat, Instagram, apps. There's no sanctions for breaches. They determine their own nutrition criteria, so Cocoa Pops, which are 33% sugar, are considered part of the category that can be marketed to children. It doesn't make sense. We're watching. Everybody should be watching this. This is unbelievable that these companies are making their own rules and then marking their own homework. And there's a very narrow interpretation. So if there's an advertisement and an advertiser said that it's meant to evoke nostalgia in adults for their childhood, then it's not primarily directed to children. And basically every ad that we complain about, they say that's the case. And no ads are considered whether they're breaching their own rules or not unless somebody makes a complaint. I've got 2 lawyers. It's really complicated. I don't think the average person would be able to make a complaint. With the front of pack labelling system, this hasn't had as much take up as it should. It's self-regulatory. It should be mandatory. There are some problems with it, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But it does show that Cocoa Pops is a 2-star product, so it's sending the right message in many cases. But there are some problems, and it's under review. One is that some products that are high in particular nutrients still get high star ratings. Children's products, a lot of them don't have any star ratings because a lot of them aren't healthy. Some products like Milo use the nutrition from the milk to calculate their health star rating. So Milo, which is basically sugar, gets 4.5 stars. Added sugar is not included in the calculation, so sugar that's derived from fruit products like fruit paste, and if it's concentrated, in fact, gives an increased health star rating. And foods like fruit juice, 100% fruit juice, get 5 stars. And really, they should promote whole foods over processed foods. Some positive developments. So Ian's already spoken about New South Wales and the importance of taking this out of the Health Minister's portfolio alone. This is not just a health Minister's issue. This is about providing active transport, it's about changing the infrastructure, it's about education, agriculture. All the portfolios have a role. We need that leadership that we've seen from the New South Wales Premier and the ACT Chief Minister to involve and engage the whole remit of the departments in government, because it's everybody's business. And I think we've seen some really amazing work around changing the food supply to promote healthier choices. And this has been well accepted in schools, and we know that has a big impact. If you have a whole of school approach around healthy foods, fundraising, canteens, it really does have an impact on childhood overweight and obesity. So they're a very, very important setting, as are early childhood, and we've really progressed very well there. But we're starting to see changes being made in other places. So New South Wales have announced an improved hospital policy, health services policy. They'll be getting rid of sugary drinks by the end of the year. That is really fantastic leadership. And I think it's really important that as health professionals, particularly in the settings that we work in, that they are promoting healthy, active lifestyles. And on the one hand, we're not saying reduce sugary drinks or increase the price and they're being sold in our foyer. That is just, we have to change the social norm, and it starts with us and the areas that we have influence over. So I think it's really exciting to see that happen. And we're starting to see that extend into workplaces, into communities. In Victoria, the local councils, under the Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, have an outcome to reduce sugary drink consumption. So we're seeing councils stopping supplying sugary drinks, and looking at local council settings such as rec centres. And we've seen fantastic work by the YMCA to remove sugary drinks from all their venues, and they're taking that global. So there's really fantastic leadership there, just a few examples of what's going on. And I think if we're not having leadership by the federal government, that we're seeing the community start to activate, because I think they understand that it's really important that we are promoting health. So why is progress so slow? And sometimes I think in my performance reviews that I should admit that, we're not being as effective as we could be. And that's really concerning. And what are the problems? Well, we're up against a big business. We're up against what Rob Moody would call the supranational, highly processed food companies. And in the same way that we fought the tobacco companies, we have a really big fight on our hands, and they have a lot of influence through the sporting codes, through the funds that they put into advertising and marketing, through the media. They have a lot of friends, and they're all supporting them. So that's really, really challenging. And we're pretty we've got Fabio here from Latin America. They're much more engaged with civil society in setting policies, in lobbying up from the community up into politicians' offices, telling politicians what people want. We often have restricted ability for governments to act. It's difficult for a state government to introduce a tax on sugary drinks. That's a federal government responsibility, for example. And sometimes government isn't willing to use that political capital to make change, where they have to take on a big industry that's probably a big contributor to the funding of political parties. And often we don't have enough assessment of whether something works or not, and a lot of the time it's not funded long enough to know whether it is working or not, and then the funding's gone because we've had a change of government. So this has become a party political football, funding around prevention and programs. And Margaret Chan, who's obviously been engaged in this area for a long time, who's just stepped down as Director General of the WHO, openly talked at a health promotion conference about the power and influence of industry through her experience with the WHO. And she said that these industries fear regulation, and that's what we need to see is regulation. And no country has managed to turn around its obesity problem. And it's not a failure of individual willpower. It's not like $11 million just threw up their hands, 11 million people threw up their hands and said, forget it, I'm just going to lie on the couch and eat chips. It's a failure of political will to take on big business and create a more supportive environment for health. And this is an example of what we're up against. So the Grattan industry came out with their report about a sugary drinks tax. in that report it talked about how diet and overweight and obesity cost the federal budget $3.5 billion each year, and the industry got together and formed this new collaboration, and they're very good at 5 minutes or finish? Okay, they're very good. Lucky. So this is not a disparate group, but they all work together. They said it's very much up to the individual to have a healthy, balanced diet and threw it back onto the individual, which is common. But this is a very powerful group. The Beverages Council, the Australian Association of Convenience Stores, the Australian Food and Grocery Council, the Australian Association of National Advertisers, the Australian Industry Group, Sugar Milling, Cane Growers, and the Australian Sugar Industry Alliance. And they frame the problem as an issue for individuals and for parents, and that government intervention is heavy-handed and a nanny state. And Barnaby Joyce, his advice, and I don't think he looks that good myself, but he said, get yourself a robust chair and a heavy table, and halfway through the meal, put both hands on the table and just push back. That will help you lose weight. So that's a pretty hands-off approach, in my view, as to how to address a really serious and critical public health problem for our society. And you know why he's defending it, because the Nationals have a lot of seats where there are sugar growers, and they're very much against a levy on sugary drinks. So what should we do more of? New South Wales has their Make Healthy Normal campaign, and coupled with a very, very broad approach, which is really important. In many states, including Victoria and Western Australia, we have the Live Lighter campaign, and I'm just going to play you one of the ads from this campaign.
Sports drink, fruit drink, energy drink or soft drink. The sugar in any sugary drink is sugar your body doesn't need, so it gets turned into fat, including toxic fat, which can lead to cancer, type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Breaking a sugary drinks habit won't just reduce fat around your waist, it will reduce toxic fat around your vital organs.
So this campaign comes with training for health professionals as well, and a lot of other materials and a website and meal planners and all kinds of stuff. So it's not just this ad. But this ad was very, very successful. We evaluated it and we compared it to a South Australian control, Gary, and we saw a big change in people who drank more than 4 cups of soft drink a week. It reduced by a third. It's very easy to get at it, not easy, but it's more likely to get attitudinal change, but to get behaviour change is really hard. So this ad works. We should be seeing more of it, and it's now been, we've not funded by the Victorian government anymore, which it was at this time. And you can do advocacy associated with this. So in Western Australia, they're trying to get sugary drinks out of sport based on that campaign. And what's the public community? The community, there's high support for policy reforms, in particular food marketing to children, but even increasing the price of unhealthy foods and sugary drinks. And we need to develop the evidence base. As I said before, it's really important to have Australian data, not just rely on international data, and ensure that there's funding and that research is ongoing. And building consensus around a policy response. So we've just led a process with Anna Peters at Globe and myself. We put together an advisory group, and we developed an action plan, an agreed action plan for government around developing an obesity prevention strategy. These are the key elements that we agree are very important to include. And we've got the backing of a large range of organisations. We're doing the very thing that Ian was talking about, working together. We're very proud to have AusANZ and ANZOS as endorsers of this platform. And the other thing we need to do is collaborate more internationally with groups that are trying to do the same thing, because we're all fighting the same problem. And that's Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, these companies are global, and we need to learn lessons from others and work smarter and build a bigger workforce to manage and change and get progress around this issue. Thank you.